the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. That's what this means.
So it appears that Jimmy Dore is really starting to just go full-on mask-off Republican. Now, he has to keep this grift intact, but basically his grift that he runs is he basically says that he's a left-winger, he's a lefty, and he avoids directly supporting Trump and the Republicans because he knows that that will paint him into a corner of being a MAGA supporter or a Republican. And so he has to maintain this facade of being this lefty he's essentially heavily hinting or implying that you should support Trump and the Republicans. At the absolute bottom, he basically makes an equivocation between an equivalency between Trump and the Republicans versus the Democrats. That's supposed to be like the bare bones of how he implies that you should vote for Republicans. But now he's going much further, straight out saying, like in this video, he's going to say, if you're the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. It's pretty funny that on the screen there's the Dr. Robert Malone guy, which is something I find pretty funny too. But he's just out and out saying basically, so he's not saying that this is a kind of statement, ironically, because he's the guy who talks about government propaganda and all that stuff all the time, but this is just his propaganda himself. If you are the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. What he's trying to say is you should support Trump and the Republicans, but I'm going to avoid saying it because I'm a bitch that needs to make sure that my grift stays intact. Because if he directly comes out and says it, people can then peg him, rightfully so, as being a right-winger. But by doing this, he can avoid that and keep his grift going. So, ironically, talking about all the propaganda when it's like, oh, this is your propaganda, dude. The way that he words that sentence, he is anti-war. I mean, basic like Aristotelian logic, obviously. If he says, if you are the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans, and then our premise too is Jimmy Dore is an anti-war person, Jimmy Dore should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. He should support Trump and the Republicans. So it's like, instead of saying, I should have voted for Trump and the Republicans, he won't say that. So he doesn't even have the courage of his own convictions, because that would make him more pegged into a corner about what he is, and people could identify him rightfully so as what he is. But here he's going to go after Joe Biden and defend Donald Trump because Joe Biden redeployed 700 troops, 500 or 700 troops into Somalia. Check this out.
So what were they really afraid of with Trump? They were afraid he wouldn't do this. That's what they were afraid of. They were afraid he wouldn't go along with them because he didn't come up in the Republican farm team. He didn't come up in the organization. He didn't have groomers, Trump. Trump didn't have donors for his whole life like everybody else. He was a donor. So he didn't owe favors like everybody else. They couldn't control him like they could control everybody. So what they did was they concocted Russiagate, red baited him for 4 straight years, and impeached him twice because he didn't have his mind right. So if you were the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. That's what this means. If you're pro-war, you vote for Joe Biden and the Democrats.
I was trying to save abortion. That's why I voted for Biden.
So Biden ended up redeploying these like 500, 700 troops. There has actually been a lot of good stuff that Joe Biden has done in the War Department that we're going to go over here. But obviously the biggest one is, pulling out of Afghanistan. Actually doing that pullout was absolutely massive, especially with all of the backlash that he got. I was actually really impressed with how he was able to say, yeah, you know what, fuck you, I'm not backing off. He like tripled, quadrupled down. If that was Obama, he would have pulled out because Obama was a weenie. But I give him a lot of credit for doing that. That was really hard to do. You even saw, and there's still a lot of damage even to his political popularity, I'm sure, in terms of approval ratings from that. But, it was very impressive to see that he decided to actually do the pullout. Trump, obviously, as a coward, he put the pullout to being after his first term was over, to put the next person, in troubled waters, obviously. But he ended up sticking with his guns. He ended up pulling out, and despite all of the manufactured, consent against him going on, he stuck with it. But also another thing that he actually ended up doing was he actually has almost entirely ended the drone war. The drone war has pretty much ceased in its existence. Barely any drones have actually been used. And this is obviously a huge, huge thing that people were criticizing Barack Obama for because there were just so many. But what you guys need to know is that with Donald Trump, with this situation specifically with Somalia, right? It's like 700 troops that he's taken. So here's what this article from the Times says. It says, while Trump moves 700 troops out of the country as part of his pledge to, quote, ending another forever war, says analyst Mahmoud, in reference to the long-standing U.S. operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere, they were deployed in neighboring Kenya and Djibouti, but were continuously rotated back into Somalia. Biden's decision, therefore, is really just repositioning them again. So what you can see here based on this paragraph is, again, it's one of the many situations we have of Donald Trump just basically doing, just these kinds of very manipulative things that he's doing where it's always fake. He's always trying to sell himself. He's trying to lie. He's trying to make stuff up. So it wasn't even really that he had pulled out of Somalia, because he just deployed them into neighboring countries like Kenya, and they would end up coming back into Somalia anyways. So typical in the fashion of Trump is just scamming, scheming, lying, making stuff up, making stuff look like one way when really they're not. And so really the change isn't that big of a deal. Now, do I support redeploying troops into Somalia? No. Obviously we need to end our intervention into these wars. But this idea that Trump was this god that ended this forever war, this massive 700 troops, oh my God, massive 700 troops that Trump moved out and now Biden has brought in. You should have voted for Trump if you were anti-war. It's just not factual. Not only that, but it says Trump pledged to stop endless wars, but his airstrikes in Afghanistan increased civilian deaths by 330% since 2016. So one of the very first things that Donald Trump did when he came into office was he actually eased the rules of engagement. And so whereas like you had to be more careful, like, okay, let's not bomb that area because there's a high likelihood of a lot of civilians being there. He said, fuck all that. And they also lowered the transparency in terms of, the transparency was already garbage, by the way, but like actual deaths and casualties and stuff like that, civilian casualties, those kind of statistics became harder to access and less transparent. But basically, just killing a bunch of civilians. And it's ironic too, because it's like, this is like the big method of like the Obama administration that progressives criticize, a lot of airstrike usage, drones, etc. So Trump was way worse on the drone war, killing tons of civilians in the hundreds of % increases. He tried to start a war with Iran. He was trying to bomb Iran on his way out even, but he tried getting us into war with Iran. He also really ruined a lot, even more, obviously, Palestine-Israel situation wasn't great, obviously, right? But the stuff he did with even like the Golan Heights, giving Israel the Golan Heights, I think even France was like, it's against international law. Like, it's crazy the extent to which Trump went to really fuck that situation. I don't think we'll ever see a president as pro-Israel as Donald Trump ever in U.S. future ever. I mean, that was just insane how much he did. So again, this idea that Donald Trump is this anti-war guy and Joe Biden is not, because he redeployed 700 troops into Somalia that were already going into Somalia anyways. It was just more diversion by Trump. We plotted this forever war, but really they're going back into Somalia anyways. So basically what you can see here is Jimmy Dore is doing this, where he's attempting to try to continuously do this, manipulation tactic of, I'm going to be the quote-unquote lefty guy. I'm going to avoid directly saying that I should have voted or supported Republicans, and instead say, if you are blank, you should have, instead of I should have, because he wants to avoid accurately being, designated as a Republican or a right-winger or supporting those kinds of people. He doesn't have the courage of his convictions, but more than that, I think it's all about just the grift. You got to keep the grift intact. Nobody cares about Dave Rubin if he wasn't a quote-unquote former liberal, if he even was that, really, honestly, and being former TYT and being gay, and I'm sure in the future probably former gay too. So, these guys need they actually need their grifts. There's also another clip we're going to take a look at here, and he's going to talk about Ron DeSantis. This is going to be pretty hilarious. Check this out.
And so now they give a right winger like DeSantis, who should be repulsive to people who are on the left. Now they make him attractive. And how are they doing it? Watch, here's what he says.
But clearly, our entire principles that the country was founded on, you cannot have a ministry of truth in this country. And so let's get real here. Let's make sure that we're doing things to benefit Floridians and Americans, but we're not going to let Biden get away with this one. So we'll be fighting back.
the Democrats are losing everybody who's gives a lick about liberty, freedom, it's civil rights. They're losing everybody. They tried to paint Trump, remember, during Black Lives Matter, that Trump was a crazy authoritarian who's going to send the army into the city. Well, now Joe Biden is doing worse. And so they're making guys like that look attractive. If you're for freedom, if you're for free speech and civil rights and liberties, who are you going to vote for? This guy or Joe Biden? Tough call, though, isn't it?
All right, so in this clip, Jimmy Dore is taking Ron DeSantis, that's right, Ron fucking DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who's increasingly looking like just a wannabe fascist. But what he's saying here is that DeSantis is making it tough to look at. If you support free speech, civil liberties, civil rights, I don't even think Jimmy Dore could tell you what the difference between civil rights and civil liberties are. But anyways, if you support free speech, civil rights, civil liberties, I think he's really talking about civil liberties here. I don't even know if he's talking about civil rights. But anyways, you got who are you going to vote for? It's a tough call. So again, this is more grifting. It's more grifting, you can see, and it's clear what his propaganda strategy is here. It's all about plausible deniability. It's all about making sure that you're not too overt in what you're saying. Make sure that you're very slimy in what you say so you can't be pinned down. Again, this is another situation where instead of just being like out and out, like, DeSantis is more of a fighter for free speech and civil rights. He won't even say that. He's saying here, oh, it's making it tough. It's making it tough to choose between the two. It's a very clear manipulation tactic, again, to keep his grift going, because he doesn't want to come out and say DeSantis is better on civil liberties and civil rights than Joe Biden, because then again, that makes him clearly look like a right-winger, which is, supporting right-wingers, which is what he's doing. So he's got to keep it on the DL. You can't be completely upfront about it, and then you keep the money coming in by having people say, oh, he's the lefty that supports Republicans. So you can consistently see what his propaganda strategy is here, which again, like I said, what I'm realizing now when I see it is it's just so overtly propaganda. I didn't even realize how much of propaganda it is until now, with the way that he purposefully manipulates his statements and crafts them in certain ways. Instead of saying, like, I should have supported Trump, I should have voted for Trump, and the Republican says, if you are anti-war, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. And so it's like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. It's blatantly obvious. He was also selling like Let's Go Brandon merch on his website too, so it's pretty hilarious. We'll go ahead and check this clip out. So there's two really main things to look at here with this DeSantis-Biden situation. First thing to note is that DeSantis has been laughably comical about just banning everything he doesn't like in the state of Florida. So that's one thing to talk about. But first, I wanted to talk about this quote-unquote Ministry of Truth that was created by Joe Biden. So the Department of Homeland Security created this governance board on disinformation or something. I don't even remember the full name of it exactly because it's been so muddied. But basically, this is the same propaganda strategy that the right wing uses. Usually pick one person. They picked the person who was the head of it, and then they just attack it. It's the typical right-wing strategy. Now, do I support the creation of this board? I don't. But there's this misinformation that the Republicans ran with, and even Jimmy Dore is running with here. He was saying he's not agreeing, I think, even that Trump wanted to send the military in to stop the George Floyd protests, even though I'm pretty sure it's pretty much confirmed that he attempted to do that, or he at least discussed the idea. He proposed the idea. He doesn't. I don't even think he believes that when he says that, but he's saying that this is worse. So this board that was created by the DHS has no actual power. It's not going to go through personal messages or anything like that. It would look at, it would analyze statements of disinformation or misinformation, and then give reports to other government agencies. Government agencies are tasked, I believe, with fighting disinformation in their relative fields. So FEMA would fight FEMA, disinformation. But the idea is that these guys are going to go through your private messages. They're going to look at your stuff. They're going to prosecute you for disinformation. None of that was ever true. That was all lies, complete lies. It had no power. It was not going to do any of that stuff. It was strictly going to, look at public stuff and, basically relay that information by conducting studies to other and admitting those studies to other government agencies that are tasked with already fighting disinformation in their fields. I believe the DHS was already even doing this like 2 years ago under Trump, anyways. But they made a board for this, so it's a misinformation. It's ironic because it's a disinformation board that was torpedoed by disinformation itself, which is hilarious to me. It's super ironic, but it was never going to be the government's coming to you with guns. I still don't support the creation of it because I just don't think I don't want to empower the DHS any more than it is already. I think it's woefully overpowered already. But it's just a blatant straw man and just lie and misrepresentation of what it was. And so he's trying to compare that with Ron DeSantis. But, recently he actually had redistricted the map of Florida, and it actually got struck down by a DeSantis appointed judge, I guess for, being too, racially charged and just saying it's unconstitutional. He also banned critical race theory from K-12 classrooms, even though it wasn't in the curriculum. Rejected 54 math books claiming critical race theory appeared in some. He just banned protests outside of homes. In terms of the actual constitutionality of protests outside homes, I think it's definitely clear that protesting outside of judges' homes is unconstitutional, according to the Supreme Court. But when it comes to just private homes, I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously, the moment it comes out violent, obviously it's going to be deemed illegal. But a peaceful protest outside of homes, obviously, we know that one of your civil liberties, not civil rights, but civil liberties, of freedom of protest, as granted by the First Amendment, that is something that you're banning. I don't know if somebody who supports civil liberties would support that, but I'm not 100% sure on the constitutionality. 100%. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an attorney, not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm not sure. But what my understanding definitely is outside of judges' homes is illegal, unconstitutional, because you're trying to basically obstruct a judicial proceeding. DeSantis mandates lessons on communism for high school students. Also, the other thing I want to point out too is I don't think that DeSantis. This is always super important to point out. Someone like DeSantis isn't against a disinformation board, or as he calls it here, Ministry of Truth. A very common, attempt, obviously, by Republicans to, lie about stuff, misrepresent stuff, give them names. But what he wants is a Republican or Ron DeSantis run Ministry of Truth. It's not like he doesn't support a Ministry of Truth in and of itself, but rather he just wants it for the Republicans and not the Democrats. Similar situation with Republicans in Hollywood, because Hollywood is something where Republicans laugh at and say, "Oh, stupid Hollywood. We don't want their opinions." But the thing is, if Hollywood supported Republicans, they would love Hollywood. So it's not that they're against actors or actresses having an opinion on politics or Hollywood and its existence in relative to its politics. If Hollywood was full of Chuck Norrises, they would love Hollywood. Hollywood would be their favorite thing. So this is a typical thing you see from Republicans. Not that they really oppose the thing in and of itself, but they're just mad that they're not supporting Republicans. So Jimmy Dore, as you can see here, is a propaganda machine. You can see a statement like this is laughably propagandish. If you are the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. This literally means the same thing as, from Jimmy Dore's perspective, I should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. And again, is Jimmy Dore even really anti-war? I don't really know. I think Jimmy Dore is more whatever he thinks boosts his image. I don't think he really has any opinions. But, just, again, like I said, based off basic Aristotelian logic, he should have said that. He should have said, I should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. But instead of saying that, he goes, if you are the anti-war person, you should have voted for Trump and the Republicans. It's woefully manipulative. It's very propagandish, which, again, is very, very ironic, given his supposed role as the fighter of government propaganda. But this is his grift. His grift is to pretend to be left-wing. His grift is to make it so that there's plausible deniability, make it so you can't pigeonhole him anywhere, and to retain and maintain that role that he has, because that's how he makes money and gets viewers. So, this is what we can see from Jimmy Dore. And he's continuously going more and more mask off, whereas before he would say maybe Trump getting elected is not worse than Hillary getting elected. Instead of saying that, he'll say, if you're anti-war and if you're this or if you're that, you should have voted for Trump. So is the evolution eventually going to result into I should have voted for Trump and the Republicans? Eventually, I think he has to give up. But given how dedicated he's been to this grift, I'm not sure if it ever will. So we'll have to see.